Hey, what is going on everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and welcome back to another episode of ModChat. For those who do not know, this is a podcast I do here in two different forms. First of all, it is available in a visual version here on the Mr. Mario 2011 YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey channels. It's also available in an audio-only format like an actual podcast, so you can take it around and listen to it wherever the hell you want to. Simply look up ModChat, all one word, in your favorite podcasting app, host, provider, or platform, and you should hopefully be able to find it. I know it's not available on all of them, but it is available on most of them. Either way, ModChat is a series I do at least monthly in which I come on here. I talk to you all about things I find cool, interesting, just things that I want to talk about, maybe do a little bit of show and tell in the world of video game modding and video game console modding. Now this time around, I will say, usually I kind of come on camera for the beginning and end of these episodes. This time around, I'm not doing so. I just have some Wipeout Phantom Edition gameplay up here because people seem to enjoy that. Although at the same time, I seem to be missed a little bit when I'm off camera, which I do appreciate. So don't worry, I will be back on, but just not getting the camera out for this episode. Either way, let's go ahead and just get into these topics here because we're kind of covering a little bit of everything old and new this time around, and a little bit of also what's old again is new again in a way. We'll just get into it with this first topic, actually. So if you've been following the channel for the past month, you might see that I've gotten a little bit of a PSP bug, and I've been really covering the PSP quite a bit. Not only it is, I would say, my favorite portable system, or I guess specifically it's my favorite handheld console, for a whole lot that it's done for me and just like what I find interesting in there. But on top of that, there's also been some really cool developments that I've been kind of covering on ModChat here the last few years that I haven't really actually been able to put into practice, namely the Arc 4 custom firmware. And I will say, it feels like I kind of jumped back into the PSP at the right time because as of this month here, you could see, this is a few days afterwards, but this is from wololo.net. They state here the 20-year-old PSP can now connect to WPA2 Wi-Fi networks. And the reason why this is so cool here is because if you have a PSP which is Wi-Fi compatible, so any model except for the Street, you might have noticed that it's a little difficult to get onto Wi-Fi networks now, because you can even see with the screenshot here that if you're choosing a security setting, you can either choose no security, so like a unprotected network, or WEP, or WPA1 using TKIP or AES. But WPA2, I mean WEP and WPA, the original ones, they've been long deprecated for a while now just because of so many security issues and such around them. But WPA2 is what most people run on their Wi-Fi network. And if you can't get your PSP onto your protected Wi-Fi network, then usually the workaround was you'd have to spin up a separate 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi network that had no encryption on there, and then you can connect to the internet. Most people didn't do this though because they didn't want to do that, maybe effort, maybe security reasons. Also, I'll be honest, even back in the day, the PSP's browser and internet capabilities, while they were good for what it was, even I noticed back in the day it was slow, so I've never really had a hankering to get my PSP back online. But it's cool that you can do it now because there are some great use cases. But getting into this, I've kind of been putting up some footage here because I have been covering it, but they state here, Acid Snake and the Arc development team have released a significant update to the Arc custom firmware for Sony PSP. Custom firmware now allows the PlayStation Portable to connect to WPA2 encrypted Wi-Fi networks. This is thanks to the recently released WPA2 PSP plugin created by developer Moment and published on the PSP Homebrew Discord. So real quick, it is covering it here, and they even show the screenshot here where this developer here named Moment had said, and this is on February 3rd, they stated here, I managed to adapt the existing WPA implementation into a functional WPA2 stack. Please give this SE plugin a try and let me know if it works for you. I anticipate there may be some issues with GTK. P.S. This will break WEP and WPA, so proceed with caution. This quite literally, I'm not in this Discord, but it just came out of nowhere here, and it was originally released as a PRX plugin in which you could download it and add it to your custom firmware. And by the way, this plugin here, it's still a work in progress, but it works for any PSP custom firmware from what I know, like LME, ME, Pro, of course Arc. But Arc, the reason why that's a little bit special is because they've released a new update which ends up integrating this directly into the firmware itself, so you can just enable it and disable it like a custom firmware feature as opposed to having a separate plugin on there. They do state some of the limitations, however, here, and this was originally covered by Nebula NL over on Reddit, but they state that first of all, this is 2.4 gigahertz only. And this is important because they do state if your router router uses a single SSID for both 2.4 and 5 GHz, you may need to separate them and connect your PSP to the 2.4 GHz network. This is also only WPA2 AES. We do also know that WEP and WPA compatibility is broken on here, and when it comes to WPA2, WPA3 mixed mode, they say that your PSP might struggle to obtain an IP address, and you can fix this by setting a static IP for your PSP on the router itself. You could also do it on the PSP. If you can do both, that's optimal, but if you can only choose one, you should really be going for the router itself on there if you're choosing a static IP address. Either way, I did try this out. I've covered it in a video. I did try this like shortly after it was integrated into the ARC custom firmware, and it works pretty well. I will say for some of the little functionalities, like if you're going to be playing using Pro Online or using like X-Link Kai or something, if you're going to be playing online on your PSP like games using custom servers or LAN tunneling and such, this should work out just fine. If you're wanting to use the built-in ARC for updater, that should work fine as well too. But if you're going to be using it like I showed in the video for like internet browsing and such, you're not really going to get too far. It's just not only the PSP's browser is so old, but it's already also limited, and it was even limited back in the day, I'll say that. So for people who are thinking they can just, go to any modern website, more than likely not. I do have a video covering it in detail if you have ARC 4 custom firmware and you can update on there, and if you are needing to get on ARC, I have plenty of videos covering that as well too. But either way, this is such a cool plugin that was released seemingly out of nowhere for the PSP, and I just can't speak highly about it enough here. I do know it's still a work in progress, so I am looking forward to seeing what improvements are made on here, but so far people are enjoying it, and that's the important thing. Now, it's been a bit since I've covered some of these really cool ports over to the Vita, and the Vita, in case you do not know, like the PlayStation Vita, it is a fantastic, third-party port machine or homebrew port machine, I guess you can say, because there's so many games that have been getting reverse engineered or ported over with the actual like source code of it being released and ported over to the Vita, or even of course we have the SO wrapper, so there's a lot of Android applications that are games that are able to get ported over to the Vita, which is really cool. However, this here, this is not a new one. This is about 2 months old now, but I still want to cover it briefly. This is Death Race Vita version 1.0 from Renegade here, and this here is a port of, well, it says Death Race for Vita. Death Race is an attempt to learn how the 1997 driving mayhem game Carmageddon works behind the scenes and rebuild it to run natively on modern systems. So Carmageddon is, in short, it's an open source port of Carmageddon, which I know will make a lot of people happy because not only this game was pretty bloody wild, I will say, and I mean that in like the most like literal way, but there's people who have a lot of really great nostalgia for this game. So I'm sure there's people who are listening to this and watching this right now who are excited about it. You can check out the releases and the source code available, which I'll actually go to the source code page here, which is the GitHub repository. It states here, like it says, reverse engineering the 1997 game Carmageddon. It looks like this is originally from Death Race Labs, but of course it was forked by Renegade here. Now it looks like these instructions in the README are more specifically from the original repo on here, but you could see here that it's essentially going to be the same thing when it comes to the Vita itself, where you're going to need to install the VPK, but you also need to bring over the game's data files yourself so you can play it that way. And I'm just loading up the release page on here as well too, because this is where you can download the pre-compiled version, but over on PSX Place they do state here some notes. It's recommended to adjust controls in the options sections as you please. In order to use the full game data files, place your Carmageddon files. GOG version files can be used as an example in UX0 data/Death Race, replacing the freeware provided ones. Death Race supports the GOG CD audio convention. If there is a music folder in the Carmageddon folder containing files track2.ogg, etc., then Death Race will use those files in place of the original CD audio function. So that's cool. Now this here is a newer one, which this is something I was talking about a bit of, and this is Ultimate Spider-Man Total Mayhem Vita. It's currently at version 1.1, and this is from Renegade and The Flow. Now this here was the last update, and I believe was even released this month, but they state here that this is a wrapper port of Ultimate Spider-Man Total Mayhem for the PS Vita. This port works by loading the official Android Xperia ARM version 6, ARM version 7 executable in memory, resolving its imports with native functions and patching it in order to properly run. By doing so, it's basically as if we emulate a minimalist Android environment in which we run natively the executable as is. It does require libshack suprx, kubridge skprx, so you should be familiar with these two, of course, if you've been running some of the Android ports, and of course the game data files. So it is on version 1.1, in which they were able to fix the wrong mapping for select and start that were swapped, improved input code logic, improved audio code logic, untied the frame rate, so now game logic will run at 60 frames per second instead of 30, which is pretty nice, and then they disabled the debug mode in the video player. I'm not sure if that was causing conflicts or what, but interesting to see at least. Either way, I like loading this page up here because you also get to see some screenshots of the game itself here, and I mean, this looks great. This looks great. It seems to be running at a solid 60 every single time if the top left indicator is anything here. But you see, this is awesome to see. So even more Vita ports, I'm not going to be complaining about this. This is awesome. Something that I do find fascinating, interesting, and awesome is the world of video game preservation here. And just, you know, what we're seeing more foundations and especially libraries even do. And even just like looking at this here, this is from the Video Game History Foundation. And you could just see, like looking in the background here, all of the magazines here. You see, well, that's really awesome, like 2013 Lara Croft right there. And then I love seeing these cabinets here too, just seeing like the little rarities and discs inside of there. But either way, we're not here to just like goggle over this photo. We're here because I wanted to share the Video Game History Foundation library opens in early access, and it states here for free for everyone wherever you are. And this is just really cool because the Video Game History Foundation, this is something that, I mean, I've been passionate about. I've really liked what they've done. The work they do is always awesome. But they state here just in short that some of their early access to a digital archive of video game history research materials are now available at library.gamehistory.org. And they're stating here that ever since we started in 2017, the Video Game History Foundation has been building a digital library to help the study of video game history. We've been collecting development documents, behind-the-scenes content, rare video game publications and catalogs, magazines, memorabilia, ephemera, and more. You know, that is definitely not a word you use on a daily basis. After years of cataloging, processing, and digitizing our collections, we're ready to open our virtual doors to the public for the first time. So some of the collections that you'll see here are never-before-seen game development materials, artwork, press kits, promotional materials from iconic video games, and over 1,500 full-text searchable out-of-print video game magazines, including game industry trade magazines, rarely available to the public. So their OCR was going crazy right there. That's awesome. Now there's a lot more that you can read up on here, and I would recommend checking this out here, but they also state that some of the other really cool stuff is like the first 100 CDs from the art and press release archives of GamePro magazine have been reformatted to view in your browser. This one actually might interest a lot of people here. An extensive international collection of From Software promotional materials collected by citizen archivist Chris Orkuhart, I hope I'm saying that mostly right there, with a blessing from Software to donate them to our library. And then going to the actual library system, you can see here, well, it looks like a library system here. That was one of the screenshots, but at least like going into this here, we can check out the catalog itself. So this is where you can look and see what they have. Now, I did also want to show this because it might be a little confusing to some people. And by the way, for anybody who might be wondering if they can play video games on here, I should actually cover the usage of video games in here because they do have a frequently asked questions section at the end, but one of them is, let's see, can you play games in this archive? And they say no for now. With limited exceptions, the Video Game History Foundation does not collect retail video games and does not have plans to provide them to researchers. Additionally, restrictions in the United States copyright law currently prevent VGHF from sharing digital access to out-of-print video games with researchers. We are fighting to change this law in coordination with the software preservation community. So at least going back to this here, going back to the catalog, like I said, I kind of wanted to show you this a little bit. So if you've used any type of, like if you use like your local library digitally, then it's going to look a little something like this, right? And you can see a couple of the search that I did here before. So like if I do like PS1 and just like look at this, can't find anything. But then I was thinking, well, this is a little bit of a, you know, it's kind of some of the older materials. So if I look up PSX, for example, you see a lot more here. And one of the things I immediately didn't know was a Sony Pro PSX Pro. Identifier Mag Sony Pro. And they even state here Sony Pro, later PSX Pro, was a British spin-off of GamePro magazine focusing on the Sony PlayStation. After 3 issues, the magazine switched from a bi-monthly to monthly format and was renamed PSX Pro. In total, this short-lived spin-off ran for about a year, which explains why I haven't heard about it, but we can check this out here. Collection overview, you can see what they have available, but if you're seeing that like you want to actually read this and you can't, it's because not everything is going to be on here just yet. So this is where you'd have to go to the digital archive, which brings you to, well, kind of a dark mode version of this here. And here you could actually do some of the more searches, but if you want to look at this here, some like the featured ones, for example, are, let's look up the From Software promotional material collection. We can click on this, for example, and you can go through this here, see if there's anything that might pique your interest. And Bloodborne, people can't get enough of this, so you can load up the Bloodborne one. And for example, like this is something like a Bloodborne tote bag. You can go to the gallery of this, you can check this out. They did show that this was Japanese on here, but loading this up, okay, there we go. And here you can actually like zoom in and get some more details. Wow, you can actually get a lot of details on this. Holy. Okay. At first I was thinking, oh, that's just like a little bit silly on there. But it's like, no, actually that is incredibly detailed. If you're wanting to get like some specific research on that, like go ahead, do your thing. However, going back to this, they have, a little description for the item itself, the date it came out, names, subjects, the language associated with it as well too. One more thing we can look at here. Let me see. How about this? The Bloodborne press kit with review build. Now, of course, the review build is not going to be available on this, but you can check this out here. That is the description. Looking at the gallery, this loads up here, and let me just see what's going on. Like if we go full screen, there we go. That'll be a little bit better. All right, so you can see all of this, and then it looks like you can pretty much go through everything that is available on here. Of course, like you can't touch it, mind you, but you can get some really nice detail on this, which is really awesome to see. Okay, they didn't, like, this is, it's not that I'm mad about this. The thing I'm mad about is that these press kits are so awesome, and it's so frustrating that these are never available for sale, because I swear, like, if there was just a market where, yeah, you could take, okay, yeah, it's the review code and all that, I understand. This is just me ranting a little bit. There's so many people that would have paid good money for this, I'm sure, if this press kit was just released as a collector's edition or a special edition of the game. So it's really frustrating when I kind of like my collector's editions as well, too. I used to buy every single one. I don't really do that anymore now. But I mean, just something like this, it would have been unique and really cool enough that I think it could have definitely warranted having this released for the public as well too, not just being released to a press kit. It's been a bit since I've talked about anything related to the PS5, and I know that's kind of just been chugging along as well, but there's been a little more development on here. So for the PS5, this is from Wololo.net, they state that firmware 6.0 to 7.61 are getting kernel read-write access. So the PS5 JAR Loader, released with kernel read-write support for 6.0 to 7.61, has been, well, released here. And they state here that the PS5 developer Hammer83 has released the PS5 JAR Loader 4.01 a few days ago. This utility lets you run payloads via the BDJB exploit on PS5 firmwares up to 7.61 included. This new release leverages a discovery by hacker Flats, which allows kernel read-write even on the higher firmwares 6.0 to 7.61. To the end user, this means you'll start to see more useful payloads and utilities for your hacked console. In particular, if you've been sitting on firmwares 6.0 to 7.61, PS5 JAR Loader itself comes with debug settings and an FTP server to get you started. So that's really awesome here. Now, talking about the JAR Loader, this is what I like. They state here, this from the README, this project uses vulnerabilities discovered in BDJ layer of PS5 firmware version 7.61 and earlier to deploy a loader that is able to listen to JAR files and execute their main class. This makes it easy to burn the BDR disk with the loader just once and then keep on running new versions of the experimental code. This repository provides all the necessary setup needed to create both the loader BDR disk file system and the jar to send to the PS5. And now they're going to, explain it here in English. They state here, in other words, PS5 JAR Loader is a payload loader for the BDJB exploit. Instead of having to burn a Blu-ray disc for every single payload you want to load, you just need to burn a disc with PS5 JAR Loader, which in return will load any payload you send to it via Telnet. It might sound complicated, but there are tons of tutorials around how to run it, and once you're used to it, it's fairly straightforward. So essentially kind of breaking that down, because I have covered some PS5 stuff before and I've even done a bit of show and tell with it. Typically when this was first coming out, you did need to, BDJB, it's not the entry point, but it's one of the entry points available for the PS5, and it's pretty reliable. But you have to have a Blu-ray burner and you have to burn a Blu-ray disc. And typically what you would need to do is whenever you wanted to burn, as they state here, a different payload, or if there was a new code update or what have you, you had to burn a new disc. So that's why they actually end up recommending rewritable Blu-ray discs instead of just burning single Blu-ray discs over and over. But now the PS5 JAR Loader, thankfully, not only has been updated for higher firmwares, but if you don't know about this, instead of having to burn, as they say, every single payload onto separate discs or having to reburn discs, the idea is you burn the JAR Loader one time, and from there, as long as you're connected online, when you run the PS5 JAR Loader, this will enable you to just, as it states here, run the JAR Loader itself one time, and then you can load up new versions of whatever payload you want to on there, which is quite nice. Talking about the background on this, they stated a few weeks ago, Hacker Flats disclosed a technique to get kernel read-write on higher firmware, 6.0 and higher, by leveraging GPU DMA routines. The hacker shared his code here back in January, so this is a GitHub gist they're pointing to. But this allowed Hammer83 to implement the technique into the JAR Loader to enable features that require kernel access on the console. And it's stated here that while PS5 firmwares up to 4.51 have enjoyed a solid jailbreak environment with lots of features, firmwares 5 to 7.61 have been stuck in a situation where, although a jailbreak is available for them, which is the UMTX exploit, features are restricted. While firmware 5.0 to 5.50 have good hopes of seeing Slayer's Govi's K-Stuff, which is a powerful self-contained PS5 debugger that emulates kernel read and write, wow, okay, being added eventually, which would unlock all the features we enjoy on the 4.51 jailbreak. It has been known for some time that kernel read-write would be more complicated on 6.0 and onward, as Sony have patched some of the vulnerabilities involved with K-Stuff. So that is why this is so big, on top of it just being, well, a exploit for a higher firmware on the PS5. So this is wonderful to see here, more progress over on the PS5 side of house. And if you give this a try, if you if you have any experience with this, if you've given this a try, if you've been liking this here on a higher firmware like this, let us know. Going all the way back to the PS1 here, we're going to be covering this article over on Time Extension by Damian McFerrin, and they state here that a new and cheap PS1 optical drive emulator option is now available. And the quote here is, you only need a Pico 2040 and an SD card slot to achieve a cheap PlayStation ODE. Now, for anyone who does not know, optical drive emulators, usually they involve ripping out the old disk drive or the old laser assembly on a console and then being able to replace it with some hardware that interfaces with a SD card, a micro SD card, a SATA drive of some kind, a USB drive of some kind, and therefore you're able to put your games onto flash storage and load it up on the console that way. So therefore you're still playing on the original hardware, but you're not having to worry about messing around with discs. You're not worried about messing around and putting wear and tear on the laser and the drive assembly. And also you get some nice benefits. Games are going to load faster on that original hardware because there's no longer seek times on there. And there's several of these for the original PlayStation, but they state here getting into the article that one of the most popular ODE options for PS1 is XStation, but it seems as if a new low-cost alternative is now available. As highlighted by modder TZMWX Dyer, the PicoStation project allows you to create a cheap PS1 ODE using a Pico 2040 and a SD card slot. So for anybody who's been following ModChat for some time, I actually have briefly covered PicoStation at one point. I didn't do any show and tell or anything related to it, but I covered it when it was still pretty new, and I know friend of the channel Modsville USA, he also covered it when it was pretty new. So it's interesting because you could see right here, just looking at the photos available, you have a RP 2040 right here. This is a bootleg one. I can tell it's not like an official one here, and I say bootleg kind of lovingly on there, but you see that, you see the micro SD card and you see the micro SD card slot. However, you could see on this as well too, you still do need to do a partial installation on some other points here. So you do need to have a quick solder board of some kind that would be like related to the XStation. So you're still going to be doing an installation which is pretty similar to the XStation, except this here is the, well, PicoStation at this point. But then here's the top of the board where you could see this all soldered in, which it looks like, I mean, he did a pretty clean job here, and then soldering it directly into the micro SD card itself, and then, presumably able to play games and such on there, which is pretty like minimalist stripped down on here, which is cool. However, he even stated here, this is the translation, I suppose, that a few days ago I discovered that John Bauman updated the PicoStation project of Paulo code on December 10th, 2024. I modified two motherboards, one with the Pico module directly soldered onto the board and the other connected to an X-Station slot via a FPC cable. Both machines run great with significantly improved compatibility. Now you only need one Pico 2040 and an SD card slot to achieve a cheap PlayStation ODE. So that's okay. So that's interesting on there, actually looking at the translation. So this is something I should kind of re-clarify then. It looks like you could either do one of two setups. You could do something like this where you're using a quick solder board to make it a little bit easier to solder in, or you could just go balls to the wall and just solder in everything directly, like if that's really what you're wanting to do. So cool. All right. Like I'm liking this. This is awesome. And especially when they're saying here that there's been significantly improved compatibility, that's been the issue we saw with the PicoStation originally, that yeah, it was a open source reimplementation, I suppose you can say. And while the project and the awesomeness of it were there and I was seeing the vision of it, it was just that people, when they were trying it out initially, and this a few years ago, it was just that the compatibility was quite low on there. Now they do state at the end here that while this is indeed a cheap ODE solution, it does require some soldering. I don't think it's some, but some soldering and modding skills, so it certainly isn't as easy as, say, the Saturn Saru flash cartridge or even the plug-and-play SIO, although the later option has some serious issues. And I will say on here too, that's actually I do want to correct that with the article. The SIO is not plug-and-play. You do still have to do a internal installation of the switchboard on there, and then externally it looks like it's plug-and-play, but it's not like that. So interesting to see, at least, that it seemed like, I kind of want to cover this because at first it seemed like this was another kind of new project or something, but this is actually just an improvement over the PicoStation, showing that PicoStation's firmware has been improved on here and there's much greater compatibility. But also now, if you really want to get minimalist with your PS1 ODE setup, this is really all you need. Of course, you're going to need some solder and some wire and some patience, but you really just need a RP2040 board, a SD card, well, micro SD card, and a micro SD card slot. And with that, like, you can have an extremely minimalist open source ODE for the PS1. That's cool. So recently we've covered the really cool stuff regarding DCA3. However, there's still work continuing on this, and it's not just DCA3. Stefanos Cornelios ended up posting up a link to a YouTube video where he said, first steps of DCA3 Miami. And in case you do not know, that is the RE3 project, the Miami branch of it, being re-implemented on the Dreamcast, which in plain English means Grand Theft Auto Vice City open source re-implementation working on the Dreamcast. Let's look at this video here. I haven't seen this yet. Alright, so right off the bat here, you gotta realize this is extremely early into porting and development, and just for disclosure, I actually ended up changing the playback speed to half speed because it was going so fast with the frame rate just being so high, to the point where it might have caused issues for anybody with epilepsy. But you're seeing here that it is working. Like, I'll even, this is slowed down to half speed. I'll even run this at normal speed here, but you can see it's running. Now is it looking ready for prime time? Absolutely not. But is it running here on a Dreamcast emulator? Absolutely it is. So we just got Grand Theft Auto 3 on Dreamcast. It's still being worked on, but look forward to seeing Grand Theft Auto Vice City on there. Now, some people might be asking, hey, are we going to see San Andreas? Probably not. If anybody's asking about like the other ports and such that have happened, look, we have San Andreas on the Vita, for example, because it ended up being a Android wrapper, similar to what we've seen for other games. However, when it comes to Grand Theft Auto 3 and Grand Theft Auto Vice City, those ones were actual reverse engineering re-implementations, in which they were reverse engineering the retail game to get the original like working source code. Then they were able to use that source code to re-implement the game and port it onto other platforms. So what I'm saying is we haven't had that on San Andreas. We're probably not going to have that, so don't expect to push your luck and get San Andreas on Dreamcast. But I will say I certainly wasn't expecting to see Vice City on Dreamcast. This here is a GitHub repository from developer Ellipsits, and this here is the Game Bub. Now, for anybody who might be wondering what the heck the Game Bub is, well, it states here Game Bub is an open source FPGA retro emulation handheld with support for Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games. Now, it looks like there is a video of this here they end up sharing, so we can just go ahead and look at this. And on purpose, I haven't looked at this video because I kind of wanted to give my first thoughts on here. But you can see that this is all, the cool thing is this is all open source, because some people might be saying, okay, this looks a lot like an Analog Pocket. And I have no doubt that it's definitely drawn inspiration from the Analog Pocket. But the nice thing is this is FPGA. This here seems to be completely open source hardware and software, and by the hardware I mean like the parts list is available. You can go out, you can purchase everything, you can build it yourself from scratch, or even, you know, hire a company to build it for you, or probably even, you know, start purchasing like some that are going to be already pre-built. And it looks like compared to, well, like something like the Analog Pocket, yeah, you're not going to get as much of the shininess that you would get from a full retail product. But the cool thing is, again, this here is a open source implementation of this, so the code is available. Anybody can improve this at any time. If you don't like this shell, if you don't like this setup, you don't have to stick with it. If you have the know-how, you can improve it, you can change it, you can fully modify it however you want to. And that's nice. This is what I was expecting as well too, that you can also load up your own ROMs as well. So as long as you have the ability to actually fire this up and play it, you can do that. That's pretty nice to see. And of course, Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance ROMs are shown on there. So if you don't want to mess around with your cartridges, if you want to keep them safe, don't worry, you can still just play them like this here. And even a multiplayer link cable support. That's really cool. So you can see on the left an original Game Boy Advance SP, and on the right you have the Game Bub right here. That's awesome. Like, I love seeing this all so far. What else is going to be in here? This is big. Okay, there's a built-in rumble motor and a built-in accelerometer and gyroscope for so for some games such as like this WarioWare game, that's incredibly useful. Built-in clock, so that real-time clock is going to be important. And I'm wondering, custom design PCB and shell, that's great. I am wondering real quick. Let me bring up a little bit of an oddity game. Oh, the last thing. You can dock it. That's awesome. That's awesome. I will say, I myself, I'm not trying to like crap on this, but like I've never been the person who really plays like portable games on a screen like this. Not really for me, but do I like having this feature available? Absolutely. Absolutely love having that available. Now this here I kind of want to share and maybe even like ask a little bit because this is how one of my best friends and I, like when we connected back in like middle school or so, this is something that he was telling me about. There's this game, I've never played it on the Game Boy Advance, called Boktai, and when it was localized, it got the subtitle, "The Sun is in Your Hand." And this game was a little bit infamous with emulators because at the time, there was very few emulators that could actually play this game. And the reason why is because you could see here in one of the photos, they state here, this is a solar sensor. On the side of the Boktai cartridge without the label is the solar sensor. You can charge solar energy by making sunlight hit this sensor. So there were several emulators, and I'm sure this is kind of a non-issue now, but at the time there were several emulators that couldn't run this game properly because it physically needed the sun. And it was one of those games where, you know, it kind of took the touch grass meme literally. You had to play this game in a bright setting or you had to go outside. The idea was, I don't know the story behind this, but it somehow fits into the story and the lore of the game where you need to use the power of the sun in order to actually advance yourself and play the game. And they made a physical version of that in the cartridge, which is cool. The reason why I'm bringing that up is because I wonder if Boktai, like a game like this, would work just fine on the Game Bub or if there would be any issues with it. I'm curious about that. And also I'm sure I'm showing this to people right now who have no idea that this game or this functionality was a thing, but look into it. Boktai, just check it out. However, going back to this, it looks like, you know, based on this here, this was started at least 2 years ago. If you go to releases, we can see the initial release, so the bit streams for the Rev 2 hardware. So you have the source code, but you also have the boot, Game Boy, and GBA files right here. If we go back to the main README itself, we can see here that the features are, well, it plays physical Game Boy cartridges, including Color and Advance. You can load and play ROM files from a micro SD card with all of the support support that we saw in the video, multiplayer link cable functionality. Here's the thing too, custom from scratch Game Boy and Game Boy Advance FPGA cores with great game compatibility, a 15+ hour battery life, video output in order to dock it, and extensible hardware designed for future improvements. That's cool. Building a Game Bub handheld requires manufacturing PCBs, 3D printing the shell and buttons, and assembling components from a variety of sources. For information on manufacturing and assembling your own, see the building instructions here. And if you're interested in purchasing a complete Game Bub kit, there are no immediate offers to plan a kit, but if you're interested, you can fill out this form right here, which is a little bit of what I was talking about, where it's either you can build it yourself or, maybe start ordering if people are accepting money to build them out. Now, for the last thing I want to cover here, I know it's kind of a video in a video, and this is from a YouTuber by the name of Low Level, who I'm not familiar with their work. I've never watched any other video except for this one, and I'm going to have this link down below because it's about a 30-minute video, and I'll actually say this. I did really appreciate it, and it kind of also gave me a little bit of pause and insight into how, I guess, viewers can appreciate ModChat as well, too, because this was a topic I really didn't know all too much about. This guy knows clearly more than I do, and he breaks down this article. He has his commentary, he has his explanations on here, he has his little moments of just being like, oh, this is not very good. I don't want to spoil it all too much, but what I'll say is he did great coverage of this, and I thought it was a incredibly enjoyable viewing of this here. But the reason why I'm bringing this up, it's called Some of the Worst API Security I've Ever Seen. And in short, this was in response to, this was covering an article about a bug bounty program that McDonald's India, I believe, was doing, in which there were a lot of issues in the ordering API. It was just incredibly insecure. There were so many ways where you could just get free food. You can get food delivered to the middle of the ocean. I'm not kidding on stuff like that. You're just going to want to give this a read or a watch here. But the reason why I'm bringing this up, it seems so far off from modding, right? This is the part of the episode where usually I like to cover something that is weird, interesting, cool, funny, tangentially related to modding overall. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because, well, if we go down to his description, there's a link to the original article, which is from Eatonworks, right? And not only this website is great here, not only like he covers it, he has all the bits about, like I'm loving it. He has all the McDonald's references. Look at my mouse. It's McDonald's fries. Look at that. It's the theming and everything here. And please, if you are interested in this, I would recommend giving this a read. Not only Low Level did a great job adapting it to a video form, but Eaton did a fantastic job just reading this, even for anybody who you don't really understand API calls, exploitation, such like that. It's a well-formed site here. But some people might be wondering, why am I talking up Eaton so much? Like, what is the big deal here? Why am I talking about this at the end of ModChat? If you're not familiar with Eaton, let's just check him out here. Actually, I'm just going to have to go to his original, is it product? Here we go. In case you don't know about this, Eaton from Eatonworks is the same Eaton behind the fantastic application, which is Fat Explorer. And if you don't know what Fat Explorer is something that I've been recommending and using for years. It is pretty much an all-encompassing storage device management software for Windows, for Xbox 360 drives, and as of the last few years, original Xbox drives. Not only it has a free version that you can check out, like the 3.0 beta, this is what you're going to want to run. I know some people have, iffy things about betas, but no, the beta, it's completely different than the original, like last stable version. It actually has wonderful features that are readily added in there for not only the Xbox 360, but the original Xbox, and you can purchase it as well too to fully unlock it, which I will say I ended up purchasing a license for it a few years ago. It's completely worth it in my opinion if you're using it to manage like multiple Xbox and Xbox 360 drives now and in the future. But what I'm saying here is the developer behind Fat Explorer is the same developer who ended up finding all those bugs in the McDonald's India API. When you... The cross-section here just, it kills me. I love it. It kills me. Oh, and I will just share this here, just the key points in summary before we get off of this. So he states here that these flaws allow you to have, well, the ability to order any number of menu items for about a penny, the ability to steal, hijack, redirect other people's deliveries, the ability to retrieve the details of any order, the ability to track any order in the on-the-way status, be able to download invoices for any order, submit feedback for orders that are not your own, view admin KPI reports, sensitive driver information. I don't want to share the next part with you all, but I kind of have to because I've been reading this off. If you wanted to know how much, because he submitted this to a bug bounty program, right, for McDonald's India, and they patched everything. If you want to know how much he got, we're going to skip to the end here. Let's see. Sir Eaton, for doing all of that work here, he ended up getting paid for it with $240 US through Amazon. Thanks for your contribution. Well, thank you for your contributions from McDonald's India. This seems like this really, you know, he takes it in stride. He even says Christmas gifts for family will be a little lighter on the wallet this year. Even given the severity of the findings, I cheekily suggested that they ask McDonald's USA to send me a gold card. Unfortunately, they weren't able to do that. And it's funny that you see his attitude is so positive. He has a photo here with his laptop with the page up on it at a McDonald's with a McDonald's order. Like, that's hilarious. Like, you can't ask for any better class than that. But I'm just here like, you know, this is a really bad exploit. This is a really bad, very expensive exploit. And this was not enough, in my opinion. 200. I mean, I'm happy that Eaton seems to be thankful about it, but in my opinion, $240, not enough that they paid this man for this work. Either way, that is about it for this episode of ModChat here. If you enjoyed this episode, a like would absolutely be appreciated. If you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well too. But if you've made it to the end of this episode, what I like to do is I like to pick a keyword or a key phrase. And if you use that keyword or key phrase in a comment on the video upload, I'll know that you've made it to the end of this episode. So, you know, in the spirit of McDonald's, let's go with fries, right? Do you like French fries? Do you hate them? Do you do the thing where, like, if you go to Wendy's, you get yourself a Frosty and then you dip the fries into the Frosty and eat them that way? Let me know. Maybe I'm thinking of this too, not only because of McDonald's, but because I haven't eaten anything yet, so I do need to get my food sorted now. But if you use fries, let's say that. If you use fries, do you miss Fries Electronics? It doesn't have to be the exact spelling, but if you use fries as a keyword in the comment of a video upload, I'll know that you made it to the end of this episode. Anyways, that is about it for this episode of ModChat. As I always say, this is Mr. Mario, signing off. Thank you all for listening and watching, everyone. And until next time.